For those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Clay from Anthropology, and I am thrilled to be co-hosting with the Center for Latin American Latino Studies here at Central, Dr. Mariana Petry Cabral, all the way from Brazil via Providence, who's with us for 2 days. So we have the first lecture today, and then you're welcome and invited to join us again tomorrow in the same place, but different time, 1:40 p.m. for a separate but related lecture. So Dr. Cabral is a Brazilian archaeologist whose work focuses on indigenous knowledge and the intersections between scientific and indigenous ways of knowing. Her research and writing work to develop critical insights into the nature of archaeology, in so doing valorizing indigenous concepts and practices as tools to construct and reconstruct narratives about the past. She's worked in the Amazon for over a decade, doing both archaeological and ethnographic field work. Since 2016, she's been a professor of archaeology at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. She has an academic and professional background in journalism, history, and anthropology. She's currently, to explain the Providence connection, a visiting scholar in residence at Brown University's Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology and the Ancient World. So please join me in welcoming Mariana Cabral.
Thank you all. I'm going to read, but so I can keep to the schedule, and I'm very glad you're all here. I have to thank very much Professor Elizabeth Clay and Professor Mariana for receiving me and making this possible today. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to meet you all and meet scholars. It's really a great honor, and for me it's a great opportunity to share my work with you. And so I really thank you all for being here today, and I hope some of you can come tomorrow and talk about some other things connected to my work in the Amazon. So, let's start. I'm a Brazilian archaeologist, as Elizabeth said, and I have done all my academic training, and I will start explaining to you who I am, so you can also understand my path through that. So I've done all my academic training in Brazilian universities. I started in southern Brazil, where I was born and raised, in Porto Alegre. Then I crossed the country to live in the Amazon for 11 years. I lived there in the state of Amapá from 2006 to 2005 to 2016. And in 2016, I moved to Belo Horizonte in southeastern Brazil. I'm now a professor of archaeology at the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology. That's my university. Today I'm going to share with you part of an extensive work that I'm involved with for nearly 15 years now. This is an ongoing project of collaborative research with the YMP indigenous people who live in the state of Amapá in the Brazilian Amazon. But before I present that, let me acknowledge my positionality and how I came to work with indigenous archaeologists and indigenous history. I come from a large city in southern Brazil, Porto Alegre, and in this map, you can see the current situation of indigenous land in Brazil, which are marked in orange. Since 1934, the Brazilian constitutions, and there are 5 of them, always recognize the indigenous rights for their ancestral lands, and the state should work to guarantee these rights. Looking at this map, please observe how indigenous lands are not evenly distributed all over the country. This distribution shows the impact of colonization over indigenous people in Brazil and their rights for land. The fact that the larger territories are inland, especially in the Amazon, tells us how colonization efforts struggle with the forest environment, which we find in the Amazon. And also, it shows that the states arrived later in the Amazon, in this region, a situation that allows indigenous people to safeguard larger portions of land. As you look to this map, you can imagine that where I grew up in southern Brazil, indigenous people were actually erased from history. And it is not that they are not there today, because they are, but their history has been erased. This is part of the process of colonization. So when I started undergrad studies in the late 1990s, I became really fascinated by indigenous ethnology. I had never studied that in the school class. I spent my years as undergrad doing research on archaeological materials from indigenous sites, most of them from pre-colonial period before the European invasion. That's how I started studying indigenous history. I was very interested in understanding the long-term history of indigenous people to connect with their lives today. For my master's degree, still in southern Brazil, I wrote a monograph about the making of the landscape by hunter-gatherer indigenous people during the late Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene. This is like 10,000 years ago, 10 to 8,000 years ago. After that, I received this, for me, incredible invitation to move north into the state of Amapá in the Amazon. There, I had a very ambitious task of creating a department of archaeology at the local research institution. It's called IEPA. This was a life-changing opportunity and completely transformed who I am. Living in the Amazon, and I lived there for 11 years, changed not only how I do archaeology, but also it changed myself. It made me much more aware of diversity, but also of social and economic disparities, and how they connect to historical and cultural processes. Because the history that we have in the Amazon is very different than the history from southern Brazil. There are different historical processes involved. And this kind of process, I do believe that we as archaeologists can help to describe and explain and show how the colonization happened. So when I started my graduate studies toward my PhD, I was committed to the idea that archaeologists have to work harder on a role as storytellers. As someone from European descent, working with indigenous history, I chose to engage with indigenous people and follow their ideas, but also follow their demands about the history that we could write. And that's when I started working with the YMP people from Amapá in the Brazilian Amazon. I want to emphasize how telling other people's history is a great responsibility, and it does have impact on how descendants live today. And it also affects how we actually can imagine society for the future. So things that we say and the way we portray people in the past, they have impact on how we plan the future in our society. I came to learn with indigenous people and traditional communities in the Amazon that the past is not a foreign land. It is happening here and now as we write history. As I'll try to show you today, the past is present. And this is something very important that I came to learn while working with indigenous people in the Amazon. As I talk about the present, do not forget that indigenous people in Brazil are facing today significant threats over their constitutional rights for lands, which members of the National Congress relate to agribusiness are now jeopardizing with attempts to change the Constitution. So I invite you to follow the indigenous associations on social media and learn more about their claims and support their rights. And before I go on, a little word of advice. Do not forget that the Amazon is a huge continent, and here we have the map of the United States over the Amazon. So in the Amazon we have many different histories and cultural processes, and we can say that there are many Amazons inside the Amazon. I'm going to tell you about the Amazon that I came to know and the archaeological project with the YMP people, and I will start presenting now for you the YMP people, which are these indigenous people that I have been working with for the last 15 years. The YMP are an indigenous group who speak the YMP language from the Tupi branch. They have a fully recognized territory, the YMP indigenous land, which is 1,500,000 acres large, so it's a large territory, located in dense tropical forest, mostly surrounded by preservation areas, which are of significant environmental interest for the Brazilian government. That's how they put it, this idea of preservation areas. In spite of such privileged location, YMP people still struggle against mining companies, gold miners, and even government-sponsored agrarian settlements acting in their neighborhood, which are serious threats to indigenous sovereignty. In 2002, the Brazilian Federal Agency of Cultural Heritage, which we call IFA, inscribed the oral and graphic expressions of the YMP, known as Fusiwa, on the Brazilian list of intangible cultural heritage. In 2003, the UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, announced the oral and graphic expressions of the YMP as one of the masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage, which led to its inscription in 2008 on the representative list of intangible cultural heritage. These cultural heritage recognitions were very important to enhance YMP interest in their own knowledge and histories. This led to process of heritage management by the YMP, which are central to explain how I met them. It was through a series of activities for protection and stewardship of YMP heritage. That's how archaeology got into the YMP life. I met the YMP through anthropologist Dominique Galois, a long-time partner of the YMP. Actually, she has been working with them since before I was born. She coordinated the YMP Researchers Training Program, which is focused on training indigenous researchers to engage with their own oral traditions and cultural practices. This training of indigenous researchers aims at empowering young people as indigenous knowers, inciting transgenerational bonding with elders. Because we have this problem about the transmission of knowledge from the youngsters to the elders. And this is something like we see also in our society, the lack of interest about what the elders have to teach us. So this program also offers training into scientific knowledge as a way to prompt comparisons between knowledge systems. And that is how archaeology shows up, with a focus on mapping places, histories, and places. The archaeological research became part of the researchers' training as a mode of dialogue between indigenous and scientific ways of knowing. So we use archaeology to make comparisons between knowledge systems. The archaeological project at the YMP Indigenous Land started in 2009. Through the years, we have developed many different activities. We've done things as workshops and travels through the territory and mapping of places and histories. We visit the archaeology lab and storage room in Macapá City, which is about 8 hours drive plus the displacement they have to do inside the territory. We've made some recordings on video and audio of histories. We've done lots of report writing and summarizing, and also we've done one archaeological excavation inside the territory. I will present here some of the lessons I learned from the YMP regarding things from the past. As we carried the work, I soon realized that the scientific tools I was trained to use in archaeology were not enough to guide me in understanding YMP ideas about things from the past. The YMP ideas and knowledge about the past did not fit into my previous training as an archaeologist. I felt I didn't have, my training was not helping me in the beginning to work with them. So I chose to follow their guidance and learn about their knowledge of the material traces of the past. This is a journey into another cosmology, letting myself be affected by concepts, thoughts, and practices, and forcing me to reconsider all given ideas I have about past evidence, which includes everything I had learned about archaeology in university. I allow myself to enter another world. And today, I invite you to join me on this ride and be open to challenge some of our assumptions about the past, the things, and the people. In a way, I like to think of this as an experiment about knowledge. I chose to call it an experiment inspired by anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who's a Brazilian anthropologist, and his exercise, what he calls a thought experiment. Viveiros de Castro explains that we should not see the thought experiment, and here I quote, as an attempt to think oneself into another form of experience, but rather as a manner of experience for oneself, another form of thought, end of quote. So it is not about having different experiences of things, but actually using different ideas to think, different thoughts to manage experience. And that's my attempt, to experience another form of thought about material traces of the past. And this will lead to another kind of archaeology, you can say. And I must stress that the YMP ideas about that are not a systematic set of knowledge for itself. They don't have this encapsulated as some kind of knowledge about the past. Rather, they have a much wider knowledge system that connects to these ideas. So the work that we do together is a constant comparison between archaeology, which is a particular set of knowledge, and the YMP knowledge at large. As we do that, we are building bridges between different ways of knowing the past. We actually, understanding archaeology as a tool for translation between the different systems, we use archaeology as a way to make this bridge. How we can use archaeology to dialogue about different ideas about the past. We are, of course, aware of the enormous asymmetries regarding science and traditional knowledge. We know the science and traditional knowledge are not in the same step. For instance, while scientists like myself, we claim for universal knowledge. Traditional people, on the other hand, particularly Amazonian indigenous people, insist in what we might call a multifold perspective, which I do believe can teach us important lessons about being tolerant, about understanding different knowledges, about being able to acknowledge different ideas. My effort while working with indigenous people lies at acknowledging the existence of different explanations, seeking to understand another point of view, which is grounded in a completely strange place, the indigenous knowledge system. And I take this as part of our social and practical role as scientists, using archaeology to enhance the visibility of indigenous knowledge systems, their complexity, their richness, and the value of protecting the lives of indigenous people today. The existence of different explanations between us was clear from the beginning. As soon as we start mapping archaeological sites, it became evident. One of the first findings for me were these grooves in rocks at the riverside. From the archaeological point of view, these are marks of tool production. But for the YMP, these are the footsteps of Yaneyara. Yaneyara is a hero from the beginning of time, like a creator hero for the YMP. We all recognize the grooves as traces of the past. We all recognize that someone had made them, but we draw from very different bodies of knowledge to explain them. So we have very, very different explanations about these marks. Things became more complex when I realized that from the YMP point of view, there are much more traces of the past to be recognized out there, not just the traces that I was familiar with being an archaeologist. The large Sumauma tree, which is this one of the largest trees in the Amazon forest, it's a good example for that. So look at the branches, the branch angles, how they connect to the trunk. And observe how these branches, they kind of grow to positions that are more horizontal. So this kind of disposition of this branch is very important for the YMP. For the YMP, this is a mark from the beginning of times, a time when animals were just like people. And this is a common idea for indigenous people in the Amazon, that in the beginning of times, everyone was people. And then some people become animals. But in the beginning, everyone was people. So the story tells that bird people were taking part in a party, and then they left the party and sit on the tree branches, making them bend into this horizontal position. So the branches were not horizontal in the beginning of times, but when they sit on them, they will bend to these positions. And that is the reason why the Sumauma tree branches still grow like this today. So these branches today, they carry the story from the beginning of time. But for archaeology, this is not a trace of the past. This is like There is no body of knowledge to explain that in archaeology. Because from a scientific point of view, this belongs to botany or biology. We would call it a natural phenomenon. And of course, people in botany and biology will have explanations about that. For the YMP, on the other hand, this was clearly made by someone. Some people. They're not human people, they're bird people, but they were people. For the YMP, this tree carries traces from the past. It carries a story about bird people. So how not to say that this is cultural? In fact, the YMP, as many Amazonian indigenous people, they recognize the presence and agency of many different beings around us. From their point of view, far more people populate the world than Western scientific thought can imagine. For them, there's much more people than human. There's a wide ethnographic literature on Amerindian people showing how personhood, this idea that we have about personhood, is not limited to humanity, being a quality found on objects, animals, plants, rocks, wind, the sun, the moon, and so forth. So all these elements that we consider as part of nature, from the indigenous perspective, they might be human, they might be people. For instance, and here's some examples, the Manchineri people in Upper Purus River regard some hills as their ancestors. Whether in the Upper Negro River, Tucano people see their ancestors in rivers. So it's not a metaphor. They understand that hills or rivers are actually related to them in some kind of ancestral relation. As for the YMP, the forest itself is full of other than human agencies. And humans engage with them in a daily basis. So every day while you walk in the forest, you are actually connecting to these other than beings, finding them, encountering these other people. So these other than human subjects are part of Amazonian indigenous societies. So when you think about what is society from the indigenous point of view, these beings are part of society. They are social beings, just like we as people. They belong to society. They are not nature, as we call it. As explained by anthropologist Fernando Santos Granero in this book, and here I quote, in Amazonian ontologies, things, or at least some things, not all of them, are considered to be subjectivities possessed of a social life. So this can work to pottery, this can work to flutes, to musical instruments, this can work to the hills, the rivers. So it depends, like different groups have different understandings about these other beings. The ethnographic accounts in the Amazon show very clear how there are many different people besides human people. As I follow my YMP colleagues, it became clear that these other than human people also left material traces in the landscape. They also produce material traces, just like as human people do, bringing to the fore questions on what is an archaeological site and who may or may not make them. Because like if these other people also make things and things that tell a story about the past, so in a way they're also making other kinds of archaeological traces. So what is an archaeological site after all? Like if we consider all these different people. So during several trips to map places and history in the landscape, the elders would guide us and share with us their histories and their knowledge. They share their knowledge and experience in observing and leading our attention to many different aspects of the places we visit. At these places or at villages, they would provide long narratives learned from their parents and grandparents. And these narratives are I like to think of these narratives as the theoretical background sustaining YMP knowledge. As we as scientists, we have theoretical background for us. They too have these theoretical backgrounds. While visiting these places, we were receiving practical lessons about the material traces of the past, which involve many other than human subjects. One time of place are the ancient villages of the giant snake anaconda, which is also a kind of people. As I told you before, animals are people. So these are the anaconda people. And the giant snake is a very important being in the Amazon. It plays a very important role in many different groups. So, in fact, in every river, one can find anacondas villages at the backwaters. So every backwater is also underwater, and there is this anaconda village. The villages are at the bottom of the rivers, and only shamans can see them, even though many people may hear noises or smell things when crossing over them. At one particular setting, a small lake inside the forest, narratives tell that the lake itself resulted from a fight between the giant anaconda and a YMP ancestor. The story goes that anaconda was very angry with the YMP ancestor and created a thrill by rotating around herself, which turned everything into a vortex filled with water, creating then the lake. So the lake is the result of anaconda people action. It is made by anaconda people. Anaconda then established her village at the bottom of the lake, where they still live today. Anaconda is there, family is there, and the YMP ancestor is also kept there. As we visit this place, two elders guide us, pointing to features that mark these ancient events. So the lake's round shape and steep slopes, these were caused by the swell. So there are like marks of this fact. A small stream which was made by anaconda's path to meet with ancient shamans, and we could see the stream there. A lack of animals' footprints around the lake, which are explained because the animals are aware that anaconda lives there, so it's a very dangerous place. And the silence around the lake, which we had to respect in order to not disturb anaconda's place. As for the archaeological knowledge, the way like I was trained in university, we could not find any what we call anthropogenic feature. So from an archaeological point of view, a very scientific way of looking to the place, there is nothing there made by humans. Well, but in spite of that, the YMP researchers that were taking part of this mission and who have this training in archaeology with me, they asked me to actually register the ancient village of the giant snake anaconda as an archaeological site. After all, they were aware that the Brazilian government protects archaeological sites, so it was a good move to protect this place in their territory. But of course we could not do that because of the lack of traces of human people, which was something basic for making this kind of register. Even though we could find many traces of anaconda people. And their attempt to do that, to ask for the register of this as an archaeological site, shows a very important move into, we can think about these translations that they were making between their knowledge and archaeology. So they show the difference between our archaeology. When they ask me that, they know there's no human marks there, but there are people's marks there, all the people's marks are there. So when they ask me to actually like register this site, they are showing kind of the difference between these two, let's say, archaeologists. As for scientific archaeology, only human people are considered. Whilst for the YMP, there are many other people besides human interacting in the world. In other words, what we understand as people are quite different collectives. The translation of the ancient village of Anaconda as an archaeological site by the indigenous researchers shows the merging of two different statements. One, from the YMP knowledge, there are more people in the world than just human people. And the other one, from archaeological knowledge, archaeological evidence is connected to people. See? So they are merging these two ideas. And that shows like this very interesting exercise of translations that they are making. As YMP researchers do that, they are obviously subverting and perhaps betraying the archaeological statement as they push further the notion of people. And their movement causes disturbance to our concepts, because it made me feel, what do I know and what is people? How do we understand personhood? And how do we use that to do archaeology? Besides the question, where is an archaeological site? They pose an even harder question to archaeology. What is people? We face then the great divide between nature and culture. In order to follow what YMP are teaching me, I had to let go of this divide and open up my own concepts and ideas to be challenged and changed by YMP thought. I will move now to my final example, because I show you the grooves on rocks, I show you the tree, and this is my last example, the bird. As you know, it's on title, there's this picture to that. So I'll use what I learned about the birds to show you how YMP knowledge offers an opportunity of engaging archaeology to indigenous thought. And here we go. This is a jacamim, as we say in Portuguese, and in YMP language is also jacamim, so it's pretty similar. And I think it's called in English a gray-winged trumpeter. This bird is found in northwestern Amazon and the Guiana Shield. As you can see on the map, the red dot there. And this bird, as you can see, has a black body with gray round back, its size about 1 foot 8 inches tall. And they are not much of a flying bird, rather they run on the ground, more like chickens in a way. And the YMP, as many other indigenous people in the Amazon, enjoy having jacamins as pets. So you see them on the village, they're very common. But they also hunt jacamins for eating, but they're not going to eat the pets ones. So just make clear, pets are pets and hunting games and other things. So as a living bird, the jacamin is part of what we call in Western terms nature, right? Like we see this is part of nature. And we might even call it as a natural resource in a way, like in case that we use them as food, for example. So we may say that it's a natural resource for the YMP as they hunt this and eat this animal. Both concepts, nature and natural resources, are alien to YMP people. These are concepts that they're not there in the YMP language. There is no exact translation for these ideas. These ideas are not there. And it makes it very hard to translate this to them. They are concepts connect to our great divide between nature and culture, a divide that we apply to separate people from animals. People belong to culture and animals belong to nature, right? So for us, this is all set, and here's the tricky thing, to follow YMP knowledge, we have to let go of this divide. For them, this divide is not there. They do not organize their understanding of the world to these assumptions that there is nature and there is culture. So to follow the YMP ideas about people and birds, things will look different, and I'll try to show you how this happened. For the YMP, as for most Amerindian people, in the beginning of times, there were only people. All living beings were people. They talk like people, they live like people, they had parties, and they play songs. So they act just like human people. There are long narratives about those ancient times. The YMP tell lots of these narratives about ancient times. And they always mention the ancestors. So the ancestors were there. In fact, the reason why people know today these stories, the reason why they still can tell this story, is exactly that some ancestor witnessed these stories in the beginning of time. And then this ancestor would put the story forward and tell the story to the other people. And that's how the stories reach today. So if everyone was people in the beginning of times, so were the Jacamim. The reason they appear to they appear to us as a bird today, is linked to many transformations that occur along the way. So in the beginning, they were like people, and then things happen to make them look like a bird today. However, one should not be fooled by their appearance, as they are still people. And that's something that the elders especially told me many times. Like, they are still people. We've seen them as animals, but they are still people. And anthropologist Viveiros de Castro, this Brazilian anthropologist, coined the term Amerindian perspectivism to refer to these ideas, which are ideas shared by most indigenous people in South America lowlands. As he puts it, and I quote, yeah, here's the quote. Animals are people or see themselves as persons. Such a notion, such a notion is virtually always associated with the idea that the manifest form of each species is a mere envelope, a clothing, which conceals an internal human form, usually only visible to the eyes of the particular species or to certain trans-specific beings, such as shamans. End of quote. The fact that all these beings are people, even today, is one of the obstacles to translate archaeology and all our concepts into IMP language. But we attempt to do so because it's part of the project that we do together to make these translations. So as we work together, we chose to make translations as a means to strengthen, make more strong the YMP knowledge system. Rather than simply teaching a scientific practice, like how we do archaeology, we are actually exchanging knowledge and looking for ways to value the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous perspective. And for that, we chose to understand archaeology in a slightly different way. We are working with material traces from the past, which is something that we always do in archaeology. Traces which were made by someone, which is something like one of the assumptions of archaeology, that we traces made by people, by a social agent, and of course, this someone must be recognized as some kind of person, an agent. And these are like the basic assumptions for any archaeology. Regardless of what kind of archaeology we're doing, like we kind of share these basic assumptions. But doing archaeology with the YMP push us forward. So we broaden our understanding of people in order to include more than just humans. And that allowed a completely new set. And that allowed a completely new set of elements to be taken as archaeological evidence, such as the tree branches or the lake. We can say that it is a betrayal of archaeological knowledge, but it also produces engagements with YMP knowledge that displays scientific authority for an indigenous perspective. That is how a living bird becomes an archaeological evidence. You're displacing the authority from one knowledge system to the other. The YMP have many narratives about the primordial party, the first party ever made. A few years ago, we collect those narratives, and a group of YMP researchers was responsible to summarize them. Aicarã YMP, Yanaima, Yawapuku, Pena, Saka, and Savaz, the names of these researchers, made up this group. And I will draw from their work to present a summary of this story. Here, some of them. Aicarã, Pena, Yawapuku, and Savaz. So in the beginning of times, as told by the YMP, a large party was organized by bird people. And I'll go back. Yeah, that's the drawings from this party. So this large party was organized by bird people. That was the primordial party, like the first party ever made for the YMP know about. The YMP ancestors, they were not invited, but they watched in distance and learned how to have parties. Some people had killed a giant anaconda before the party, and the feces spread from the wound at her back. story. I'm moving forward to the next one. So that's the giant anaconda with the wound in the belly and all the colors that are coming from the wound. These things that come from the wound, from the belly of the anaconda, are its feces. But these feces were multicolored, like all different colors. And bird people use them to embellish themselves as body painting, using these colors to paint their bodies. Yacamin, the bird I'm telling you about, he was the last one to get there, when all the most beautiful colors were already finished. So he was left only a bit of gray, which he used to cover his legs, keeping his body without paint, remaining black. So his body was black, and then he put only the gray color on his legs. As the party went on, Jacamin had a fight with Hummingbird, who threw Jacamin on the ground. He fell by the fireplace, and his back was covered in ashes. The first slide there. Not satisfied in this fight with Hummingbird, Hummingbird's wife threw a gourd of cara potato beer, which has a purplish color, at Jacamin's neck. The second slide there. Mutum, which is another bird people, then tries to calm down Jacamin, push him into the fireplace. As Mutum falls with his head near the fire, he burns his hair, creating curls. And that's how we see Mutum today. So narratives on the party go on with other fights and disputes, and this is something common in the parties. People get drunk, and things happen, and fights happen. So it goes like that for the OMP too. So until the closure. When the closure of the party was this huge fight, that's when bird people leave the party and sit at the large Sonoma tree. So these stories, they're all connected. Waiting over its branches until they bend to horizontal positions, as I told you already. When bird people leave the tree, they turn into bird form and fly away. That's the moment when they start looking like humans and get this bird form. As for fish people, they jump into the water and transform into fish. The same goes for all other people at the party. When they leave, they transform into the forms that we see today. Only YMP ancestors retain their human form. But let's remember, they didn't go to the party because they were not invited to go to the party. Through such narrative, it becomes evident that animals' body attributes, such as colors, are traces from the primordial party. They are material traces of a very ancient event that occurred in the beginning of times. In a very Amerindian way, they entangle past and present, reminding us that the past still exists in the present. Therefore, it keeps touching and making encounters with us today. So when we see these things, we see these marks, we are being carried again back to the party line. The present and the past are not separated. If we take the Jacamin as an example, it is possible to follow how his current appearance, his body attributes, tell us about past events. As the narrative goes, Jacamin had only gray ink to use to embellish himself for the party, painting only his legs. When the fight started with Hummingbird, he threw Jacamin near the fireplace, covering his back with ashes. And after that, his opponent's wife threw a gourd of potato beer over his neck. By the end of the party, Jacamin had his back covered in ashes, the gray color, a stain of purplish color by his neck, and the painted gray legs. And that's pretty much how a Jacamin looks like today. From a YMP point of view, appearance of birds, trees, lakes, and even humans are very good evidence of events from the beginning of times. They are the results of people's actions. They are results of people's actions. They tell us about very ancient events. YMP people today still tell these stories because they have been telling them for generations. carrying a very detailed knowledge about people and places, about stories, behaviors, about what is to be people. These stories, they are not fairy tales. They are not fables. They are not like nice stories to tell children. These narratives are living knowledge. They are practiced today, in spite of multiple attempts from our society to dismantle them, through religion, health system, and even education practices. YMP people live today in a context in which many different fronts from our society compel them to put aside traditional knowledge. There is pressure from religious movements for conversion to Christian faith. As healthcare, non-indigenous professionals hardly receive any training to deal with authority, overlooking traditional knowledge and practices. And in addition, in spite of federal regulations in Brazil for indigenous differentiated education, as it's written in the Constitution, the local education agency still offers standard programs just like the ones that go to the city, are offered in the city, reinforcing scientific discourses of authority over traditional knowledge systems. So they are facing this today. As an exercise of translation, our collaborative research is activating archaeology beyond our disciplinary boundaries. An explicit choice to follow the YMP mode of understanding the concept of people allow for a subversion or a betrayal of conventional archaeological concepts as archaeological sites. Taking the choice made the difference between doing archaeology, as we usually do, and trying something different. It makes disturbance into the discipline. However, I will argue that there is something more that a collaborative practice like this may provide, more than disturbance to archaeology. Allowing the jacqueline, a living bird, a lake, a tree, to be an archaeological evidence is taking seriously a knowledge passed over by many generations. It is taking seriously efforts made by young YMP researchers to restore conversations with elders and to learn from them long and complex stories about the beginning of times. It is a way of shifting power relationships among different ways of knowing. It is putting archaeology at the service of other people. This experience of working with the YMP dismantled many of my previous understandings on archaeology, but it also built up what I see as opportunities of awareness of our social role as people who tell stories about other people. It made me understand that our Western ideas of universe, of one single world, one single humanity, are very effective for controlling narratives. As we all know, these narratives have been widely controlled by white people from the North. As we insist on these ideas, such as taking humanity for granted, we are also silencing other histories, other worlds, other possibilities of being human. The histories that we tell may forge or dismantle prejudice. And prejudice ban books, erase histories, and actually kill people. And I truly think that archaeology has an important role there, and we should use it to dismantle this wide-accepted project of whiteness and its single and linear story. Thank you.
Any questions?
The YMP have a fundamentally different understanding of nature than Western ideas. What do they think about global climate change, and is it harming them currently?
Oh, that's a great question. We had a workshop just before the pandemic in December of 2019, discussing climate change. And it's really interesting because they do identify climate change, but they also connect this climate change to larger cycles of transformation in the history. Not that they have lived, but the stories tell about these transformations. So they do have this traditional way of explaining climate change, but of course they're very aware of the rhythm of these changes that we're having today. And one thing that it's happening because of climate change. There are some agencies that are funding research with them and like ways to foster their knowledge about dealing with what we call nature. So it has helped them to have more money for doing some of the stuff that they usually do, like looking after the fields, the kind of the way of hunting and stuff like that. So that's something that they see there is a change there because of the change in politics.
So this reminds me of how in New Zealand they passed laws making a specific mountain, specific river, and other places illegal persons in order to protect them from things like littering, because you shouldn't litter on a person. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. This thing that happened in New Zealand, there was this fight for the installation of some, I'm not sure if it was a dam or some kind of huge engineering project that would affect this river. And the indigenous people there who lived by the river started claiming that the river was not accepting that. It was not about them accepting, but the river was not accepting that. And they actually made a case to go to court representing the river. So the river was for the first time understood as a social being, like as a kind of person. And they actually won this one dispute over the engineering project, and then they passed laws recognizing that rivers or hills or like these things that we don't see as person can actually be. So this is like, for me, this is like one of the best examples of how this change on our perception and how our tolerance to this difference can actually make difference in our society, and like, because changing these laws can help us to build another project of life and like understand how to move forward with progress, but without destroying everything and like not counting as natural resources. Because the thing is about natural resources, this idea that it's a resource put us in a position that we can explore them. They are passive, yeah, like they are resource, like they're there for that, like to be used. And if you start seeing them not as resources but as people, totally change your relationship with that. And I do think, and tomorrow I'm going to talk a bit more about that, but I do think that this really has an impact on how we can see future for the Amazon and for the planet. But thanks for sharing that, because it's a great story.
Just a comment, really. Thank you for this talk. I was a little late in the beginning. I was in class. But I mean, what's your thought on what was just mentioned about New Zealand and lots of other places? Is actually technically written into United Nations rights and the indigenous people, right? The UNDRIP. I mean, lots of countries had signed this, right? Iceland being the first one, right? And the U.S. kind of late, but joined the game. But it's not a legally binding document, right? And like, how do we press countries to actually do anything about this? Is there anything to be done, really? Because the rights of nature are in that document, right? Like, is there anything to be done on a global scale? How do we press people to?
Yeah, I think there are many ways of pressing, and like different ways. Like indigenous people in Brazil are very politically engaged and like going to the Congress and now like becoming politicians and like being part of the Congress for making laws also. I think this is one way. But I think inside university, for example, the position that I occupy as a scholar, I think one way is helping to change the ideas of people about what is nature and what is culture, and like how these other ideas change the ways we relate to the environment, and how this can like make real changes in our lives. So I'm kind of optimistic. Yeah, I come from Brazil, a place where I shouldn't be very optimistic, but like I am optimistic, and I think we do have space in university to do that and like help like people that are coming now and starting to study, to think about these ideas, and like they're going to be people in society too, not just archaeologists. They're going to be politicians and lawyers and doctors and physicians and well, whatever. So I think if we make these changes inside we can push the whole society to change that. Because the thing about policies is that they're not too effective when we just decide to make them here and we don't change the society. So we have to make change in society to push policies to change it. It's not easy, but like, well, I haven't given up.
Talk more about any internal conflicts you might have felt being trained as a scientific archaeologist and then living among indigenous peoples and learning about other ways of knowing the world.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question because, like, in fact, there's lots of conflicts, and I can go like from a personal perspective, like very personal conflict. The first time because I was invited to go there, and then they invited me to do this large trip. Like, so the first trip was 25 days trip, and we were like walking for like 10 days, and then 10 days back. So it was a very intense experience. And I was very excited because I was going to work in this area where non-archaeologists had been before. So it was like, woohoo, we're gonna find like this new stuff that people have never been here, like archaeology doesn't know about. And so my first finding was like these grooves, the ones I showed you, the grooves by the river. And I spent like 5 minutes really excited explaining them what was that. Like, this is stone production site. This is so amazing. I'm so glad we've seen that. And they were very, had not interest, like I was really excited and they were like, and I kind of didn't realize at the time. And then we started walking because like we're going from one village to the other one. And like 2 hours later, we do these long walks and then we stop from time to time. So we stop in this place. We're like sitting on the trunk. And then I asked one of the YMP people who was with me, so, do you know anything about the place that I found? I found? And then he said, oh, well, you see, Mariana, in the beginning of times, Yara was walking around and the rocks were still soft because it was in the beginning of times. So when he stepped over them, he left his traces, these are the steps of the Yara. And I felt absolutely like crashed. Like, what am I doing here? Who are they for me to explain what I'm doing? And I got in what was very difficult to like, and this was like the 7th day of the trip, so it's a long time until I would be back to my house. And but then during this process, I realized that they really wanted to talk to me about the job. They wanted to know what I knew. Like they wanted to know a different way of seeing those things. Like they were interested in changing knowledge with me. So this conflict made me understand that I was not there to tell them, like teach them about archaeology. I was there because they wanted to change. They wanted to know about things, and they used the knowledge that they learned about archaeology to their political claims also. They now know the archaeological sites are protected by law, so they use this kind of stuff to talk to politicians. So we have these kind of conflicts, but there's also conflicts going on inside, because like the YMP, they are organizing different groups, and I started working with one particular group, so the other groups became kind of jealous of that, and things got a bit tricky sometimes between them. And so I also have to learn how to deal with that and like be able to share knowledge with different people and like organize my trips with them to visit different areas in a way to organize all that. And also there's sometimes people that do not like archaeology, do not like the work that we're doing, and go and talk against that, and then we have to, well, yeah, how can we do better? It's part of the work, and after all, if they don't want me to be there, I won't be there anymore, so it's up to them for that, but it's up to me to try to foster a space for it, that we can talk about it and try to figure out ways to do a better job.
Question, you know, constantly the media will come out and say, oh, we found this lost tribe and there's only one person or two people left, as recently in the New York Times. Can you talk about this as a, does it, in terms of the solace and the justification of exploitation? How do you see that?
That's really interesting because in Brazil, regulation, they have different categories to classify indigenous people. So there's these people who are not connected to the white society, the state society. They call isolated people. It's a category, it's a political category for this kind of people. And these isolated people, in the beginning, there is some pressure to we have to go after them, to protect them, so you have to see how they are. But about, I don't know, maybe 25 or 30 years ago, in fact, because of the work of many anthropologists in Brazil, we could change the kind of way of seeing these isolated people and understand that they isolated because they chose to. They don't want to be in contact with us. So we passed the regulations that we can have their lands demarcated and protected, even though they're not perhaps aware of this kind of thing that we're doing around them, but it's a way to protect them and let them decide when they want to come and make contact. And sometimes they do, and they contact indigenous people that live on the neighborhoods, and sometimes they appear in some of these, the agency posts, the indigenous support for indigenous people agency. They have posts in some of these lands, so sometimes they come. And we have some people, very recent work in archaeology, kind of these traces of these people. And they work with other indigenous people trying to map where they were going, how many there were, and they were going after the traces, not making contact, because that's the rule number one. We don't force contact. If they want to, they know where we are, and they can for us. But if they're not coming, it's because they chose to be in isolation. So it's good that we have this kind of regulation. But of course, in the last years, during the Bolsonaro government, that was a really threat, because even people from inside the agency that were put there by the new government, they started to pressure to get these people, and because what they wanted was to take these people from these lands, to have the land open for agribusiness. So there is this tension still.
One final question? Anyone? Yanush.
This also reminded me of something else. In a class last year, somebody who specializes in Irish archaeology talked about how people in northern Ireland wanted to protect this ancient fort ruins because fairies lived there. That was a big important part of Ireland. So I feel like there's these native colleges are everywhere.
Yeah, of course. And it's important that there are some regulations now in different countries to protect these places. In Brazil, we cannot the lake, we wanted to register as an archaeological site, we cannot do that because we don't have the elements to categorize as an archaeological site. But we could register as a cultural landscape, for example. It's another category, it's a different kind of regulation, but there's space for that. And many countries have provide this kind of regulation. So it's a way to protect the places, but also protect the knowledge about these places. And that's something that I think is really crucial. It's not just about protecting the people, the bodies of the people, or protecting the knowledge and not protecting the people. We have to protect people, knowledge, their practice, so they need their lands and they need their access to things, and it's the whole system that must be protected. And it's up to us to guarantee that we can do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariana.